Welcome to the show, Dan.
Thanks, Steve. Great to be with you.
It's a pleasure to have you on the program. Joining me all the way from sunny, non-lockdown Perth, where I understand, it's obvious. It's 6:30 in the morning. How are you feeling right now?
It's good, mate. I've loaded up on my coffee. The sun is emerging and coming out, and the clouds are out, so it'll get sunnier as the hour progresses. But
Fantastic.
yeah,
Whereabouts in Perth are you? Because I'm a massive fan of Scarborough Beach. I love the waves out there, and the sunset is absolutely gorgeous over there.
it is, mate. Yeah, Scarborough's a beautiful spot. I'm over south of the river in a suburb in a locality called Melville. So we're probably about, I would say, 10 k's from the coastline, and
Yep.
closest beach is Freo. So Freo is a very popular spot for a lot of Perthians and international travellers that come here and get to check out what Perth's all about.
Definitely. Well,
Mm.
Perth, Cottesloe Beach, some of the clearest water I've ever seen at a beach in my life, or at least clear compared to the waters of St Kilda Beach here in Melbourne, where you walk 10 meters out from shore and you're lucky to see your toes. So it's all about comparison. You know, they say comparison is the thief of joy, but sometimes, depending on what you're comparing to, it can be the bringer of joy. But we're getting
Yep.
into philosophy here, so let's move on. But today we're here to talk about financial wellness. And you are the founder of WeMoney, a new fintech that you've been working on for the last 12 months or so. And you have just closed a $2 million seed round, which we will be talking about today. So firstly, congratulations on the raise.
Thanks, Dave. Yeah, appreciate it. No, it's exciting for the team and the business that we navigated through the COVID environment with a fundraise and got the other side of it. So we're incredibly grateful for that. But also, I think it underscores the importance of a topic like financial wellness, given the times that we live in, the precarious nature of our own personal balance sheets, and a lot of people are really struggling to navigate these new changing landscapes and times. And WeMoney certainly wants to help as much as we can during this difficult period to help people chart a better financial life in the future.
Yeah, and I think it's a great point, because a lot of the talk back in February and March was that venture capital would absolutely dry up because of COVID-19. But ultimately, if you've got a compelling value proposition, then that money will still find its way to those organizations. And just before we hopped on the call, I was writing an article about the downturn in the live performance industries, whether it's comedy, music, theater, and so on, and how generalists like Disney, who have so many different things in their business model, are succeeding because they're able to take some of the resources and redeploy into Disney Plus. But something I came across was that Live Nation, who is, the number one promoter of live concerts, their revenue is down something like 98% year on year. They've had to furlough or just terminate tens of thousands of people. And essentially, this is not unique to them. It's a very common story. So many people out there who perhaps were already struggling when it came to managing their finances are now in a much more precarious position.
Yes, no, definitely. I really agree, Steve. I think there's certainly a bifurcation of people who are knowledge workers. So people like you and I who work behind a desk, who, quite thankfully get to wake up every single day and, travel from our bedrooms to our studies, turn at our computers and our webcams and still be able to make a living. But for those folks who haven't had that luxury, it's a really interesting change to see this little landscape of this reconfiguring of the economy. I think Mark Andreessen said it best with software is eating the world, and the digitization of every single sector right now, I think, is coming at a much more accelerating rate than we've ever seen before due to COVID. So it'd be interesting to see how the next year plays out.
Yeah, definitely. So on financial wellness, I mean, what's the backstory on you wanting to make a difference in this space? Like, what inspired you to get into this space?
Yeah. Great question, Steve. I think it really starts off in my own personal journey. So being a graduate of the last GFC, so I graduated in 2007, living in the UK at the time, inspiring investment banker to join a Wall Street firm. That never happened. And I packed up my bags and moved back to Australia after Bear Stearns collapse and Lehman Brothers, and that career was dashed. But I think one of the interesting tangents that I took in my career was taking a role in banking. So worked in banking for the first 3 years in both Bank West and NAB here in Australia, and in a very entry-level job, dealing with end consumers of their daily needs for things like home loans and credit cards and personal loans. And about sort of 3 years into that sort of journey, I really doubled down on the mortgages space and saw some of the sort of key issues of sitting across the table or across the living room from a lot of people going through that very first journey, getting a home loan, refinancing a home loan, and just seeing the exasperation on people's faces as I spoke to them and filling out this 20-page document on how to apply. And the story before that is actually the biggest part. Right? The tip of the iceberg is that process where you go to apply, but really before that, the time and effort and energy to go through the price discovery process. So calling up 10 different banks, speaking to mortgage brokers, uncovering what the best price is for you. And also the eligibility process, which is, am I eligible for Bank A or Bank B? And I thought incredibly inefficient. I often told my managers when I was working in banking about how they could improve their processes, and that often sort of fell on deaf ears. And the nexus of the inkling of Web 2.0 starting to really bubble up in, say, now 2012, I thought to myself, well, there's got to be a better way that people can go through this process of getting a better mortgage experience. And we started a company called switchmyloan.com.au, which helped borrowers interact and find banks that were suitable for them, but more importantly, get a better financial outcome in terms of a competitive rate. So that was the first sort of inkling into seeing this inefficient sort of system of price discovery. And I think after that, we can go into the story of Switch My Loan and the exit journey, and then my time over with the acquirer and after that. But I think always been interested in the intersection of finance and technology, and we can certainly get into fast forward how that
definitely
sowed the seeds of WeMoney, because that whole sort of journey was really the impetus of why we're doing WeMoney and some of the huge monumental issues that we see in the financial services landscape.
So I think I can totally relate to what you said about having proposed these different ways of working and how we can improve things, and not just falling on deaf ears, because ultimately large organizations, whether it is a NAB or a Bank West, is often bound to their existing business model and their processes and the way they do things, and throwing something else into the mix can upset the balance of things. And the people who are in those positions of power tend to be there because they've followed the script, and that's what they get incentivized to do. So it is very challenging. But at the same time, this is why we have the liberty today of jumping out and starting our own companies, and something I often encourage people to do if they are frustrated where they work. So worth pursuing. And also now what we're seeing is companies like NAB doing more work with startups, or whether it's investing in startups directly or helping them by providing resources, access, distribution channels, and things of that persuasion. I think that's where they can add a lot more value. But with respect to the whole IB thing not working out, 2008, the GFC, in retrospect, and it's hard to really answer this question because who knows what the counterfactual would have been if you did go off to work in Manhattan. But are you, based on what you do know, perhaps, do you see that as a positive, that it didn't work out
absolutely.
and that you've gone on this other path?
100%. It's a total positive. I'm glad that I didn't get whisked away at a very impressionable age of 20 and think that would have been a good lifestyle. I think there's a serial sort of awakening now in 2020 when you look back in retrospect and start thinking about grinding 100 hours per week for a particular role that you have a very sort of small impact in. You sort of trade off your younger years, your youth, for brand and prestige of working at a great firm. But ultimately, are you doing a lot of value add activity in the world? I think right now there's a lot of questions around that space in 2020. And I think that's going to emerge and sort of explode in sort of years to come. But Steve, I think the best thing that happened was it forced me to sort of reconsider a different pathway, and it led me to a path of entrepreneurship. led me to a path of using entrepreneurship to help more people and have way more scale and impact than simply being, a cog in the machine at, say, a large corporate organization, be it an investment bank or a bank or anything else. So, no, I think it's certainly a blessing.
Yeah, no, well, you are definitely speaking my language, Dan. And I think it is one of those things. 2020, COVID-19 has forced a lot of people to reflect on, what they do for work, but also how they live their lives, what's most important to them, spending time with people they love and doing things that they enjoy, as opposed to just being that proverbial mouse or proverbial rat, rather, on the rat race, and doing something because it's always been something you've done because it's about conforming to some social convention of what success is. And you see this so often with young 18 to 21-year-olds who go off in search of riches in the management consulting or investment banking world. But ultimately, even if you get there, you do find yourself working, like you said, sometimes up to 100 hours a week for years on end. And even if you make a partner, well, you're still working these crazy hours, and everything else in your life, personal relationships, fitness, health, experience of life can fall by the wayside. And sometimes that realization doesn't come until maybe you're 50, and your best years, sorry to all the 50-year-olds out there listening, might be behind you.
No, I couldn't agree more, Stephen. I think what you're seeing right now is this huge sort of schism between, say, Gen Zs and boomers. Gen Zs today think about their careers not in terms of career progression up the ranks of a corporate ladder. Their first question as they enter into any type of employment is, what is my impact? What can I do today in this organization to help advance and sort of help more people? They're a much more conscientious generation than generations beforehand. And yeah, I'd love to talk a little bit more about that in terms of the story here at WeMoney as well, because we're seeing some really interesting mega trends happen in that space and in fintech.
Yeah, and I mean, that can be a competitive advantage for a lot of people when you do actually, and we've seen this with Silicon Valley over the past, say, 10 or 15 years, where people have been rejecting offers to go and work for, Morgan Stanley or JP Morgan, and they're off to Silicon Valley because they feel like they can make more impact in the world. And that gives you an advantage as an organization when it comes to talent acquisition. And it's not just impact, but also the way the organization operates. Is it like a big bureaucratic financial services firm where you can't really change the way things are done, as we alluded to earlier? Or have you got the ability to make decisions? Have you got autonomy? Can you test things, try things, learn, iterate, grow? Because then you're working on something that's creating an impact in the world. Plus you have the ability to, inject your own DNA into the organization. And that's a really fulfilling place for a lot of people. And I think that comes back to these Gen Z, perhaps everyone else, when it comes to seeing work as something that you do for a paycheck, as opposed to something where you can leave your mark on the world.
100%. No, I couldn't agree more, Steve. It's a very interesting time, and I think a lot more people are awakening to that sort of fact right now about how they spend, their time at work, their time at home, their time with family. So, it will be fascinating to watch to see how it plays out over the next 10 years.
So, earlier you said that during your journey with Switch My Loan, you identified a number of systemic challenges as far as the financial services landscape in Australia is concerned. I mean, what are some of the big challenges that you see?
I think there's quite a heap of them, and I think maybe I'll touch on maybe part of my the latter part of my journey and how it sort of leads to WeMoney, and then delve into some of those deeper topics. But post Switch My Loan, the business was acquired in 2016 by a company called Pioneer Credit.
Yep.
Pioneer Credit's main business model was in the debt recovery space, but they also had another business line called Pioneer Credit Connect, which was a new lending operation. And at Pioneer Credit, I got to see what 3 to 4 million of other Australians live like, where it's not often talked about, the taboo subject of people are really getting down on their luck in terms of their own financial situations, and that was a massive eye opener to see some of the more ills and effects of financial services products and how they can affect people longer term, and then. Post Pioneer Credit, having a consulting arrangement with other organisations here in Australia and abroad, and just really sort of deep diving into the more sort of meta reasons of why people in general are bad at managing money at certain times of their life. And it goes into some of the deeper elements of behavioral psychology and behavioral economics of, say, growing up in your 20s, why do we encounter the ills of, say, products like credit cards, consumer debt, and, really getting into serious situations where you find yourself in $20,000 of, debt and you're trying to swim out of it, and you don't often get out of that situation until your 30s. And I think a lot of the times is when you look at financial products and services, the complexity of them, and when you've got, say, 3 or 4 different accounts with different providers, it's very difficult for a mere mortal like a human to manage that complexity at scale. And delving into a book that I know that you love, Steve, which is Thinking Fast and Thinking Slow, from Danny Kahneman. Danny Kahneman really is an exemplar in explaining the issues with a lot of financial services at its sort of root. So system 1, as Danny talks about, making decisions on sort of autopilot versus system 2, which is the much more considered part of the decision-making process. Unfortunately, most of humanity's financial decisions, or for a lot of people, end up becoming squarely in system 2. And what this means is that we can't make these decisions at scale when we've got a lot of complexity in our lives, and that leads to things like missed repayments, falling behind on credit cards, not meeting due dates on bills, and just really living in a sense of uttering anxiety. And I think this is further exacerbated by other things within financial services, which we can get into. But I think the essence of WeMoney is trying to solve a lot of these issues at its very, very root cause before, especially young people, get themselves into this, a lot of these financial traps that you can often find yourself in your late 20s.
So definitely want to touch on the behavioral science behind how large financial services firms in particular may lull younger people into making poor financial decisions. Before we touch on that though, I mean, after you sold Switch My Loan, you effectively got into a few strategy roles with Isobar and Strategica, and you did your MBA at UWA. And I guess all of these experiences, whether it was working at NAB, Bankwest, Switch My Loan, the strategy firms, doing your MBA, I imagine that breadth and depth of experiences is kind of what led you to these epiphanies and forced you to go down this road with WeMoney, because oftentimes people may come straight out of uni, they're like 21 years old, I want to start a startup because I read about it on entrepreneur.com, looks cool, but don't quite have those dots to connect yet to really identify what is an opportunity worth pursuing. So how do you feel like that trajectory of yours over the past, say, 8 years or so has shaped your worldview insofar as wanting to focus on this problem for the next, say, 4 to 5 years or whatever the case is?
Yeah, great question, Steve. Well, with Switch My Loan, I mean, that was 2012, right? The system of startups or uncovering help and assistance in Perth, of all locations around the world, was not existent. So we didn't have accelerators or there was certainly no tech investors at the time that would invest in, say, seed-stage companies, other entrepreneurs going to the journey or support network. So I did it myself. I mean, I was in mum's lounge room the better part of 2 years at the start of that Switch My Loan journey. So that was really interesting because being sort of resourceful on the information that was available on the net. Other people, particularly Silicon Valley, that was much more advanced at that time and had a great set of resources that you could tap into. But we did it ourselves really, and sort of learned the hard way. Made plenty of mistakes. I mean, monumentally huge mistakes. So I think that was a great learning experience in terms of really understanding sort of the essence of company creation, how to find product market fit, how to scale a business, how to manage people at various sort of stages when yourself, 3 people, 5 people, 10 people, learn a whole bunch of skills. I would say of all the experiences that you just listed out, Steve, I'd say Switch My Loan was certainly the learning ground of life in general, of entrepreneurship. And yeah, I think back to the point of sort of that experience in banking and everything else. It just made me think a lot more deeply about some of the issues of financial services, and then how we might be able to contribute to a more positive future, especially for a lot of young people with WeMoney. And thinking about it at its root issues. And you touched on some points earlier about banking and certain credit products. I think the core issues around this space are the complexity of financial products, like credit cards and home loans, and people sort of fully understanding them, but also some of the more deeper fundamental issues around distribution and equity of financial products and access to them. So, for example, if you look at, say, a bank today, right, and you look at, say, a product like a credit card or even a home loan, the cost of the distribution of that product, is baked in to the product's characteristics, like the interest rate, right? And so you and I pay for the totality of the cost of the bank having a office, the cost of the bank's marketing department, the other mechanics of that product, which would be the cost of the funding, the bad debt rate. And so ultimately, when you sum up all those costs are ultimately passed to a consumer, and then the bank has to make their margin on top of that. And what that causes, Steve, is that there's an added tax that we sort of all pay because of the cost of the delivery of financial services. What we're seeing right now, though, is an absolute explosion in competition. So competition is now driving the diversity of things like, the Australian landscape and the mortgages side. So TikTok, Athena, all these digital first providers, which are really running down the cost curve of the delivery of financial services products. An explosion of data. So the ability for now companies to use data and leverage to either offer better pricing. So if you look at, say, the personal loan space with people like RateSetter, Society One, what they're doing is they're really leveraging data to provide people better financial outcomes on things like your credit scores. And we see this long-term thematic trend where competition really drives down the cost of financial services. And WeMoney is really the hub for a lot of consumers, where they can discover, number one, how do they manage their money better, but number two, if we can sort of play our part in the delivery of cheaper access to financial services and products at the right stage of your life, then we think we can make a really big impact on the Australian financial services landscape, where people can get better long-term sustainable financial outcomes.
Yeah. And again, I think this speaks to competitive advantages that emerging companies do have, because they do have this lower cost to serve. They don't have the A grade skyscraper in the middle of the central business district. They're not making decisions slowly. They're relying heavily on technology and data to make better decisions faster, and therefore they can achieve great outcomes with less investment, and therefore they can pass that lower cost to serve onto the customer. And this doesn't play out just in financial services, but in all sorts of industries. And we're seeing now new media companies really take it to these behemoths like whether it's News Corp or Bauer Media, who you're just seeing lay off hundreds and thousands of staff, particularly during the pandemic, where the ad market has just dried up. And it plays out in all sorts of industries. But on this concept of behavioral science, I'd love to just deep dive into what are some of the sort of cognitive biases that you see younger people falling victim to when it comes to their financial decisions. Because, this plays out in big tech, whereby I think it was Sean Parker, the founder of Napster and former president over at Facebook, who said companies like Facebook, like Instagram, exploiting a vulnerability in human psychology to keep them hooked to their apps, to keep them selling ads. And these vulnerabilities can be used against us, but they can also be used for us. And we'll get into that as well. But when it comes to using these vulnerabilities against us, how are they used against young people? Like I imagine, short-termism is one thing, but also wanting to seek status. If you're a young 23-year-old who needs to be validated through external, the pursuit of status, sex, and stuff, as they say, well, if someone's going to say, hey, here's $20,000, you can have all of that, at least for the next 12 months, go crazy. And you're only thinking about the now, and you're not thinking about my 43-year-old self. That's a decision that for many kids is easy to make. So love to unpack that.
Yeah, it's a great place to delve into, Stephen. I think, in short, I'll use an analogy of what we're seeing right now sort of play out over the last sort of 5 to 10 years, using some of those concepts. And the best example is probably what we see now on sort of Instagram, right? So on Instagram, you see people, having awesome holidays, having the latest watches and, all the great sort of consumer goods. And what you don't see behind that is, of course, people's own balance sheets and how they might use Instagram as sort of a vehicle to satisfy some of those really sort of deep sort of human needs around sort of status and, looking good in front of your friends and your peers and keeping up with the Joneses. What we have seen though, Steve, is when you look at, say, somebody in the early 20s and as they hit their sort of early 30s, there's other considerations that happen. It's building a family, buying a home, upgrading your vehicle. When people say in their 20s end up going into that realization where they're about to apply for that mortgage, and then they realize, oh my God, I can't do that because I've got this huge baggage. There's this massive realization that sort of comes to them where it's saying, look, I've really almost squandered my entire 20s on things that, in retrospect may not have been important. And to your point, the discounting effect on understanding what I do today to what will impact me in many, many years to come is often one of those cognitive biases that we find it very difficult to sort of manage right now. People are much more focused in the present than they are in their sort of future selves. And what we're seeing right now, Steve, is this sort of explosion of people, talking about those situations of how they've got themselves into all these levels of unsustainable debt, and destigmatizing the conversation now on making that really positive. And I'll touch into that a little bit later. But the appreciation of time value of money, very difficult for people to understand. Short-term thinking is a huge issue where people make decisions for today rather than thinking about the consequences in, say, the years to come. And people also have a cognitive positive bias where they inflate the future in terms of the expected reality of your future self. And when it comes down to, say, financial products like debt, people think that they can easily pay off a debt product in, say, the next year and the next 2 years. But what studies often show is that the projection of the future self is probably inflated by the tune of almost 100% of the actual reality of the outcome. Yeah. And
the optimism bias.
Yes, correct. Yeah, 100%. So how this works for financial products and services is that, I would say the advertising around, consume now, sort of pay later. What I think a lot of young people are waking up to these days, Steve, is that really the right thing for me? Should I be consuming my future on things that may be totally irrelevant for me today? And maybe thinking about how do I, invest a lot more in myself, invest in general. You see in the explosion now of things like stock trading apps where people are, much more conscious about the income side of their balance sheet and capital growth side of their balance sheet. So, I think younger people are becoming a lot more aware of some of these, practices of companies, and platforms like Instagram right now have got a community of people like, say, the Australian debt-free community, where you've got real people talking about real issues about how they find themselves in, things like, excessive debt and things like that. And what they've done, and there's a whole bunch of them that 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 are really helping the casual observer think, right, if that person got into that situation and they got out of that situation, how can I be like that person? So there's this real sort of explosion of this community element.
Sorry, go on.
Yeah, and yeah, I think sort of WeMoney really sort of sits at the intersection of that. How do we help people avoid some of those cognitive sort of traps in how they spend their money? How do we uncover a lot of insights into helping people along that journey of managing their money a lot better? But more importantly, the sort of the we in WeMoney is doing that together with a community of other people that can help you along your journey to achieve some of those financial goals. And that's an incredibly exciting thing that we didn't see sort of 10 years ago, is this destigmatization of talking about the topic of money.
Yeah, and it seems like this destigmatization is something that transcends not just talking about money, but people talking about perhaps mental health and things of that persuasion. Over the past, say, 10 years, it's become a lot more prominent, with a lot more high profile personalities stepping forward, whether they're top entrepreneurs and things of that persuasion, just coming clean about these things. And that's kind of inspired so many more people to open up and talk about these things openly. And sometimes just talking about these things immediately makes people feel better, and immediately gives them a sense of control.
Yes. Oh, I couldn't agree more. It's relatable. It's fundamentally human to understand someone's real journey, and that's, I think, a much more powerful concept than, say, you know, having a glossy magazine and talking about something that might be unrealistic. And yeah, we're certainly seeing a huge sort of awakening of a lot of people. Really resonating with that. It's really resonated with me as well.
Yeah.
I think that's a big part of my life, and seeing that sort of journey unfold for me personally. And yeah, I think it's an absolutely awesome thing.
Yeah. Couldn't agree more on that. And I guess on, you mentioned these buy now, pay later apps like Afterpay, for example. And, Afterpay, I find, tends to attach itself to those, status and stuff columns, right? As opposed to something that's going to benefit you, like, for example, education. And that, again, preys on some of those psychological vulnerabilities that younger people have. I mean, what is your view? And I'm sure you've been asked this before, but on buy now, pay later apps versus, say, credit cards.
Mm. I think there's the good stuff about buy now pay later, and then there's some of the issues that people can find themselves with any type of pseudo debt product or even credit product like buy now pay later. But I think some of the really good things, Steve, is number one, what it's done is it's basically reduced the cost of credit, right? It is in my view, a type of a credit product, because you've got an obligation to pay in the future, and you sort of consume something today. What it's done is it's completely transformed, say, from what a credit card. If you get a credit card, you buy something, there's this really confusing element of the 44-day or 55-day interest-free period. You have to do all these mental gymnastics to find out whether or not you're going to be paying interest or not paying interest. And that's where a lot of banks make their money, right? They make their money on those balances being left over and then getting charged 20% of an interest rate. And then we obviously know what the ill effects of that are. Where BNPL, buy now pay later, really exceeds is the fact that the cost of the distribution of the credit is significantly cheaper. The cost is borne by the merchant, as opposed to the individual. So from if you and I were to go to buy something from, say, Big W, we're not paying anything for that credit. We may be paying indirectly from slight little price increases in the products, but I don't think we've seen any big evidence of that just yet. So that's a good thing. I would say where buy now pay later really can get people unstuck is the same issues with credit cards. When you have a multiplicity of different buy now pay later products, and you use them in order to fulfill short-term requirements in your life that may have more drastic long-term consequences. And I think there was a ASIC report a couple of years ago that sort of highlighted that, say, 1 in 6 Australians get themselves into an issue where they can't manage those repayments. And I think, especially for younger folks, is to really understand, do I need to buy what I'm buying today? And more importantly, not having 4 providers on the go that can really amplify your degree of indebtedness, then makes those very difficult to manage. So yeah, it's something that we're really monitoring right now and just seeing the potential impacts of how that will affect people's balance sheets and financial lives.
Yes. So I guess 2 things come to mind for me when it comes to buy now, pay later, or credit cards as well. I mean, the interest cost aside and the compounding effect of that aside, if you give young people the ability to just buy now, pay later at will, it kind of deprives them of that ability to, it deprives them of the need to develop an ability to delay gratification and to save and to work for something and to build that habit, right? And then the other side of that is also, well, why do you want to buy this thing? To your point, like, why am I buying this? Do I need this? Oftentimes it's a matter of wanting to feel better about themselves for some reason. Perhaps something's not going their way in life. So they think, if I buy this thing, then that will make me feel good. But oftentimes, as we know, it makes us feel good, like eating a bag of Doritos. It makes us feel good for about an hour. And then we very much come back to that baseline, hedonic adaptation. So like with, going to, I suppose, a deeper place when it comes to people's habits, the way they live their lives, buy now, pay later can actually have a very detrimental effect on, these far more philosophical questions as well.
Yeah, look, I agree. I think there's certainly for those who are more vulnerable or susceptible to some of those effects, they can have a pretty bad outcome, and especially when you remove the whole friction in that process. So you see something, you have to pay a quarter of it today, or and then the rest later. The concept in behavioral psychology where this really comes to play is I think really well put by Dan Ariely when he talks about the pain of paying, right? When we go to a store, or like just say maybe 20 years ago, Steve, when we used to go into a store and cash was a thing. I mean, cash is probably not a thing now, but when you had to pull out those wads of 50s and 100s and had to buy something, you felt the pain of handing over that physical cash that you earned, right? With Afterpay or with any type of products where you don't actually see the money coming out of your account in real time, so when you say use your phone to tap and pay or whatever else, the absence of that pain of paying means that people can make those or get into those cognitive traps of not really understanding that purchase and its effect on your current bank balance, and then how that might affect on, say, your rent payment due in a couple of weeks' time, or your mortgage repayment due in a month's time. And that's where a lot of people get unstuck, is actually understanding what this purchase means for me right now, but more importantly, how that affects me in sort of the months and years to come. So I think that's something that I think that's something that a lot of young people need to be made a lot aware of, is some of those internal sort of biases that we all have into delaying gratification and saving, and thinking twice about making some of these purchases.
And it's so true. I mean, that disconnect is real, and it's also applicable to, say, our subscriptions. Might subscribe to something for about $10 a month or whatever it is and not think much of it. But once you have, say, 15 or 20 subscriptions, and maybe you're only using half of them, you're paying $100 a month for these apps that you're not looking at your bank statement. Before you know it, you've spent over the course of the year over $1,000 in stuff you just didn't need, which you could have invested, and perhaps over a period of a number of years with compounding actually made some money. But that is real. And I think it's something that a lot of software as a service companies take advantage of. Oftentimes it's 30 days free, just leave your credit card details, cancel at any time. But what often happens is people forget and they stop using the product. But once those 30 days are up, you just start getting billed month after month after month. So you kind of hinted at younger people, or people in general, just being a little bit more aware of some of these cognitive biases. I mean, what are perhaps some, practical, actionable things people might be able to do to get on top of these things? I mean, obviously, James Clear, the author of Atomic Habits, is a big big advocate of environment design. So if I don't want to eat those Doritos, don't have them in the house. Similarly, if I want to save X number of dollars while having some sort of automation where money gets taken out of my pay and into an account that I can't easily access, is one way around that. But what would be some other things that you might suggest for some of our listeners, Dan?
I think savings goals and targets. So when you've got something in mind, like saving for a housing deposit or something that's very important to you, a lot of people don't know where to start. So they think about this big sort of goal of saving, in Australia now, $100,000 for like a housing deposit. It can be a big scary thing. And so if that's a goal in your life, a lot of people think that the 100K is a huge, big target, and they don't know where to start. And I think where a lot of people that we've seen certainly become really successful at helping, reach sort of these big goals is to start very small. So as soon as you get your paycheck, you should be looking at how you distribute all of your funds into different areas of your life. So what are the things that you need to pay for that are recurring expenses, such as your rent or your mortgage repayments or any other committed expenses like your food and sort of groceries. But more importantly, every single month becoming disciplined in putting 10% to 15% of your salary away to achieving that goal of, say, saving up for a housing deposit. It could be anything. And there's a lot of different ways that people can do that. There's a separate account that you can set up with your own financial institution, your own bank, that can help funnel those funds into helping achieve that goal. And one of the big things that's sort of uncovered is in behavioral psychology and economics is not so much the dollar amount, but where people are seeing a lot of resonance, or where people are actually achieving a lot of goals faster, is actually putting that into percentages. A percentage is a smaller number. It's much more tangible to listen to than like a really obscure number or target. And people are much more responsive or much more able to keep longer-term habits by seeing the increments of percentages as they are to, say, dollar or other obscure amounts. The same is true in reverse. So if you've got a lot of debt and you want to pay that debt off, how do you start, knocking down, say, if you're, a person that's got $20,000 of consumer debt, and that's across like 5 different accounts. What studies show is that if you focus on, say, the lowest liability first, so say if you've got a $2,000 credit card, focus on the smaller debt that you can pay off right now, and that gives you a win in the short term, where you feel really elated that you've achieved something, and that gives you the confidence to, say, tackle something that's really bigger and broader, say like a bigger credit card that's, say, $10,000. So I think in summary, it's absolutely try and automate the function of achieving any goal or outcome, because that will help you increase the ability into achieving that goal, and then try to break that down into percentages, and then focus on very, very small increments to begin with before you start, really amplifying some of those pathways to achieving those goals.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic advice. And especially the small increments. I mean, that essentially echoes Isaac Newton's first law of motion, right? An object in motion stays in motion. And this can be applied to building new habits. It can be applied to reading a book late at night when it's so much easier to watch Netflix. Commit to reading 1 page, and it's so much easier to read the rest of the chapter. You can apply it to going to the gym, commit to 10 minutes in the gym, and you'll probably stay for 40 minutes and finish a full workout. And it's the same with your saving, right? You've got a $100,000 debt, you've got a $2,000 debt, commit to the first one, revel in that dopamine hit, the positive neurochemical cocktail, and it will be much easier to maintain that habit and slowly chip away at the bigger debt. So I think that's very sound advice. Dan, with the time we've got left, I wanted to unpack team building, because you've just raised $2 million and you are over in Perth, which isn't the first place that comes to mind when we think about tech startups or fintech in general. What's your approach to building a team? Are you looking at building a team exclusively in Perth, or I imagine you're looking at building perhaps a globally, a distributed team as someone like say a Matt Mullenweg from Automatic has done with WordPress? I mean, where do you sit on this?
We sit on the Matt Mullenweg spectrum
Yep.
by sheer necessity, but also I think, given the current environment, given that WeMoney's only been around a year, half of that time is effectively, in the pandemic, and it's driven by sheer necessity rather than anything else. But WeMoney is a remote first culture. We've got a distributed team with the majority of our team based here in Australia and a few people based overseas. But no, we work from every major capital city almost here in Australia. And I think it's sort of much different to working in a corporate setting where you get to see people face to face. So the challenges of team building is probably increased because you don't have that physical sort of view of getting in and having those water cooler conversations, or seeing people sort of face to face and seeing that fidelity of those micro expressions that often lead to pretty sort of big sort of cues in how you manage certain tasks. And I think the way that we've navigated that is probably number one, as best we can, given the current constraints. But I think number two, it's the leadership style that we've instilled at sort of WeMoney is that number one, we hire well, or we try to hire the best people that we can that are attracted to working for WeMoney and following our mission and a vision of what we want to achieve. I mean, that's the first thing that I look at anybody that wants to join the business is, are you here as a missionary, or are you here as a mercenary? Mercenaries will come into a business. They'll have lofty expectations about the company's performance. They're there to ride the wave, be that for the financial gain of the impact that the business creates as they've joined. But as soon as anything goes wrong in their journey, in that organization, they're at the door. They're the first ones to check out, the first ones to be very disagreeable within meetings, and it can really impact the team culture. So I think what we try to instill here at WeMoney is that we hire on joining us on our mission to promote financial wellness to as many people as possible, and doing some of our life's best work. There will be issues, there will be problems, but if we stick together as a team and achieve some things that we didn't even know were possible, then that reward can be absolutely big and amazing. So number one, absolutely focusing on finding people that are really aligned to us from a values and a cultural perspective, because there's plenty of things that can go wrong in a startup, and there's plenty of things that can go wrong certainly in a remote setting. Number two, I think the more sort of practical elements and the way that we sort of run WeMoney right now is regular check-ins. So we have 3 major stand-up events with our engineering team each and every single week. We try to be as disciplined as possible to do retrospectives that basically uncover some of the sort of issues in the way that our workflow impacts the team and other people, so people can air out some of those concerns and be really sort of transparent about that. We also run on an OKR system where we have quarterly sort of meetings with the team and talk about the 3 months that were, 3 months ahead, and allow people to get a real transparent view about where everybody's at. And that really promotes a lot of team cohesiveness, where people can really understand how their role and how their individual contribution impacts the team contribution. I think we're navigating it okay. We could certainly be better at a lot of different sort of elements of remote life, but I think I'm actually surprised myself in terms of how well it's gone. But I'm not going to take any credit for that. That's just the amazing people that we've got on board on the journey, that have brought their own skill sets, their own degrees of maturity and outlook on dealing with a remote team. And one thing that's really emerged, is really fascinating, is this sort of almost this natural organism of self-correction of other people almost correcting and really living up to our cultural values of trust and transparency and openness. And that's infected people in a really profound way that I didn't expect. I didn't have to reinforce that as the founder and CEO of the business. That happened quite organically. So it's pretty amazing to to watch and see other people really step up and become leaders themselves.
Yeah. And I think that speaks volumes about getting the right people on the bus to begin with.
Yeah.
You know, like you said, values alignment is absolutely key. And if you don't have that, then you're going to have all sorts of challenges down the line. And like you said, you're going to have people sabotaging progress in meetings, and mercenaries don't necessarily need to leave just when things go wrong, but sometimes a so-called better opportunity, more money, whatever it is, might come up elsewhere, and they'll run in that direction. And that's something that Niccolo Machiavelli wrote about in The Prince, on mercenary forces. And maybe we'll wrap up on this, on the topic of books. You strike me as someone that has a sharp worldview, Dan, for a young lad. So what are 3 books perhaps that have had an impact on you cultivating the worldview that you have, which I'm sure is a worldview in progress, as it is for all of us, but what are 3 big books that have made a massive impact on your life?
The first book that's just had a profound impact on my life is How Will You Measure Your Life by Clayton Christensen. I think Clayton writes beautifully and even ahead of his time, and may he rest in peace. I think to learn of his sad passing had a profound impact on me, of just sort of stopping, when people that have almost been a part of your life just end up sort of leaving this world. It had a really big, profound impact on me. But I think that the part of Clayton Christensen's book on How Will You Measure Your Life that had a profound impact on me was this ability of this conversation about seeing people that he saw in the Harvard MBA program that came back, 5-year reunion, 10-year reunion, 15-year reunion, 25-year reunion, about what were the people that were really happy versus the people that, potentially, lived very miserable lives, got divorced, changed jobs, that were very, sort of wealthy, but ultimately didn't live a really fulfilled life, compared to the people that, really had an awesome life and created a lot of impact in the world. And that's something that I really took away. But I also took away the chapter of the book, which was called Staying Out of Jail, which was making decisions even when it's very difficult. And if you compromise just once, then that sort of leads into a pathway where you can make really sort of bad decisions that can snowball. And I think I read that book probably around 7 years ago, and I've tried as best as I can to really kind of live up to some of the principles that that Clayton discusses in that book. The second one is Principles by Ray Dalio. Again, a book that I know that you're very familiar with, Steve, and a book that's very important to your life. I think Ray just perfectly sort of encapsulates that we don't know it all, right? And the only way that we can grow as individuals is to receive, feedback, be that positive or negative, and we grow from pain and reflection in order to become, better people. And I think I remember listening to the audio version and just having this huge sort of revelation where, like that kind of makes a lot of sense, right? Yeah. A person like Ray, who captain of his industry, a leader in his field, made huge, massive mistakes in the early part of his career, but was strong enough to recognize some of those internal fallacies about ego that he sort of set to one side to really create, arguably the world's, best investment management company. And that's a book that I really enjoyed. And I think thirdly and lastly would have to be Danny Kahneman's Thinking Fast and Thinking Slow. Yep. That was a book that I read in 2013 as part of my coursework at university, and that was the sort of the gateway drug into deep diving into behavioral science and economics, and sort of really uncovering what sort of makes us tick. So yeah, there's plenty more, but those 3 are certainly the sort of career and personally defining books that have impacted my life.
Yeah, and I think they're all fantastic books, and we'll add them to the show notes for our listeners in case they haven't picked up and read those books and devoured them as I have many times over before. Dan, this has been a fascinating conversation. I think your mission is definitely an admirable and worthwhile one, and a fantastic way to spend the next X number of years of your life as you try to bring this idea to fruition and make a real impact on the world. If people want to learn more about WeMoney, they can do so at wemoney.com.au. And if they wanted to connect with you personally, Dan, where's the best place to go?
Best place is LinkedIn, Steve. So linkedin.com/in/Daniel Jovevski. 2 V's.
2 V's, perfect. Well, we'll add that to the show notes for our listeners as well. Dan, thank you so much for being generous with your time and for your insights today, mate.
Thanks, Dave. Pleasure to be with you.